5 different categories of assets. I'm going to talk about real estate or real assets. I'm going to talk about equities or investments in companies, either private or publicly traded. I'm going to talk about physical commodities like gold and silver, but there may be others, copper, oil. Um, I'm going to talk about cash or fiat currencies, and then I will also talk about crypto. And I'm going to talk about 2 different kinds of time horizon. I'm going to talk about short term. Short term is, say, 5 years or less, which is the time horizon is whatever I do with this money, then I may need it in the next 5 years to pay for medical bills or children's education or to buy a second home, but I can foresee a need for it in the next 5 years. And we can talk about long term, which perhaps is more than 5 years, which is something where it's an unspecified possible need in the future, like to give it to one's children or to just have it around, but there's no specific need and no specific plan or foreseen need for it. So, and then we can talk about 2 different purposes for putting that money away. One would be a store of value, just to have it, to get it at some point. And another approach would be to invest it and to make it grow. Somebody who takes money and keeps it as a store of value has a very different purpose for it than somebody who's investing it and wants to see it grow. So the different asset categories that I talked about have different uses and become useful in different ways in different places. And so let's talk about them. And maybe we should go from the long term to the short term. Or no, maybe we'll go the other way around. We'll go from the short term to the long term. So it is a fact of reality today that contracts are denominated in the currency of the country that we're in. So Canadian dollar, US dollar, Swiss franc. And fiat currency, it's a token of value. It's not actual value. And we can look at charts that show that over the long term, over long periods of time, all currencies go to zero. Currencies like the US dollar take time to depreciate in value, but they do depreciate in value. And we see that what a dollar could buy you 100 years ago is not the same. You would need many more dollars, about 30 or 40 more dollars to buy what a dollar could buy you 100 years ago, for example. So that goes to zero slowly. And then there are currencies like the Argentine peso or the Turkish lira that go to zero quickly. And even the Swiss franc is considered to be a very strong currency, will eventually go to zero as well. That is the nature of fiat currency. There's nothing backing them up. But if we need to pay contracts over the next few months or weeks or even years, we're going to have to pay them in fiat currency. Nobody's going to take payment in pounds of gold or in any other commodity that one may choose. So short term, the right place, I believe, to hold cash balances as a store of value is currencies. So why would, for example, a cryptocurrency not be an appropriate place to store value? It's not an appropriate place because you don't know what it's worth tomorrow, and its value fluctuates very, very greatly around the prices of things that one might have to pay for. It's no good to price a piece of real estate in dollars, and then today my crypto is worth X, and tomorrow it's worth 2X, and then the next day it's worth a half of X, and I don't have enough money to pay for it. And the recipient is not going to accept payment in terms of X number of Bitcoin. They're going to accept a dollar value for it. So we have to pay in dollars. So then the question arises, what do we do with the fact that if I need to hold those dollars for the long term, we've already established that the value of those dollars go to zero. And so then commodities become attractive because gold and silver do not go to zero. They always have a value. They have an industrial use, and we can be very certain they're assets that have been around for a very, very long time. And so they are very attractive stores of value to many people. And I wouldn't disagree with that. So, on some level, I'm saying gold and silver are appropriate stores of value for longer term thinkers, for people who want that store of value to be there in 100 years and or 50 years or 10 years. There we can do a quick side detour to crypto, and crypto is just too unseasoned. There are some people who I think are extremely smart who believe that crypto is going to the moon. There are other people who I think are equally smart who think that crypto is going to zero. If there are even some people who one respects highly that I do think it's going to zero, I can't rule out that it's not going to zero. So for me, crypto is not a long-term store of value. I don't know where it goes. And gold and silver are long-term stores of value. So uh, somebody who wanted to put money into gold and silver would not be entirely wrong. But I think that where the minute one looks into the long term, one's thinking less about stores of value and about places to invest and to grow one's wealth. And my belief is that gold and silver are far inferior to other places where one can put money and to grow and also preserve purchasing power. So the easiest example would be real estate. To own real estate, fee simple, freehold, without any attendant debt associated with it. Um, as somebody wise said, buy land, they've stopped making it. I think if one does a chart of real estate values in any particular area against gold and silver, we will see that it has outperformed gold and silver for the simple reason that real estate is a productive asset, in that real estate can be constructed on, it can be farmed on, it has many, many different uses. As it gets closer to population centers and populations increase, there are more and more uses for that real estate, and so it has real economic value. It's more of an important input into our economic system than gold and silver are. And then we come to the what I think is the most superlative asset, which is equities. And the reason why equities are better than even real estate is that they are the wealth creation engines. It's companies, both publicly traded and private, that create the well-being that we have as humans. So whether it's drug development companies, pharma companies, transportation companies, companies that create energy, that extract resources out of the ground, those are the engines of wealth in society. And when you own a piece of them, as one does in public equity markets, you own a piece of the growing wealth of society. And uh, we could just trace the value of an index, for example, which is a proxy for owning equities, against any one of a number of commodities. And I think that we would see over a long enough time horizon, they outperform those commodities. So then the question arises, yes, but I have cash today and economic calamity is about to hit and maybe the world's going to go awry. And the answer there is that it's very important to think about whether this is short term or long term. And if one is thinking short term, then I think that, first of all, the depreciation in the value of cash is more limited. So cash does depreciate year by year, but if you're only planning on holding it for 5 years or less, that depreciation will be limited. And any other asset that one invests in, including gold and silver, is going to be volatile. And so you may run into the problem that the amount of money that you thought to have to spend is not the same amount of money tomorrow. Whereas in a certain way, cash, while it is depreciating, or fiat currency is depreciating in a more predictable way, because contracts, real estate, the things that you might want to buy, healthcare, are priced in that currency. And so, what does one do if one is worried about the world turning negative and you have cash? I think my answer is to be very clear about what one's short-term needs are, 5 years or less, and hold that in cash. And then to be clear about what one can allocate to long-term needs. And in my case, I would allocate that to equities, and I would either pick specific companies that I feel I know well, that are wealth creation engines. And I often like to use Nestle as an example. Uh, or I would buy an index, a well-diversified index of companies based in productive economies like North America and Western Europe. Just to go to Nestle for a second, it's such a great example because it makes food products for most people on the planet. It is a warehouse of brands that we recognize like Kit Kat and Nesquik and Osem, and it's things that people buy every day. And housewives, when faced with the choice of buying the no-name brand or buying unbranded product and buying the branded product, will buy the branded product. And Nestle stands there for the quality of the product, and they have do a lot of work to source the right materials and to reassure the housewife that she's buying something that is of knowable consistency and quality. And so that is real wealth created in society. And when you own shares of Nestle, you're owning that a piece of that wealth creation engine. So that is where I would go with the part of my money that I know wouldn't have to liquidate and use for something for 5 years or more, because as we know, prices of equities can fluctuate. But I wouldn't be too worried about an impending downturn with that 5-year money, because there's no guarantee that in 5 years' time I'd be able to invest in those equities at a cheaper price. So I hope I've been clear. To try and summarize, my answer is short term, hold cash, 5 years or less, hold cash. Long term, own equities. But real estate is also not a terrible option, provided it is unlevered and you don't have too much or any debt against it. Um, Commodities like gold and silver are not a terrible option, but they're inferior for the long term because they don't have as much appreciation as equities do. They're also inferior for the short term because their prices will fluctuate. But for the short term, we have to choose between depreciating cash and variable price on commodities. My choice would be cash, but it's a reasonable thing to say that I'm going to hold some gold and silver for your interest. Lastly, my plan is to spend the rest of my life, never from now till I die, I will never have owned any gold or silver, and I feel very confident that I'll do just fine. I hope this is helpful.